go and pick up these rocks over such and such a place, pick up the rocks. The man would pick up the rocks, and when he get there, he said, okay, now, go take your truck home, leave your bed behind, and come back tomorrow and pick up your bed, truck bed. Next morning, the rocks would all be offloaded onto this castle. He'd go and get another load the day after that. And every night, he'd leave his truck bed behind, go home. The man was, like I say, the truck driver started out like he was almost in poverty, but he wound up being fairly well off because he had continual employment. Just go pick up the rocks, and the rocks were heavy. We have no idea how he moved them. Because if they moved the rocks by machines at the rock quarry, but then how did he move them from the truck bed to the castle? We don't know. Anyway, the Coral Gables Castle does exist. Who knows, this man might have known something about rock technique. I'll leave that for the time being. I don't know if I even have one of these here right now. I do, yeah. I don't spend this kind of money much anymore. It's mostly cards. On the back, this is a $1 bill. On the back of it this is known to be the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid has a top that's detached. The top has an eye. What is an Egyptian monument doing on an American dollar? Hopefully this won't get too deep for you, but some people believe that the Great Pyramid, like the Tower of Babel, was never finished. And it was up to the United States to do what the Egyptians and the Babylonians had tried to do, but had failed. That it's up to the Americans to finish the Great Pyramid. And when they finish its top, we'll be able to detach and travel to who knows where. The Tower of Babel, I mean, I'll tell you, it's in the records, they were trying to get to heaven. Trying to maybe achieve interplanetary travel or space travel. One of you asked me on Monday, did they use telescopes? I don't think they needed them. They were already there, watching the planets from in orbit around the planets. That the ancients had space travel, folk. I mean, you can believe what you will. I'll leave that for now. We'll get back to it when we come to the chapter on India. All right. Anyway, the persons who decided what the dollar bill would look like, by the way, we're all Masons. The word Mason means, among other things, stone worker, stone builder. The Masons put the Egyptian symbol on our dollar bill. Take that for what you will. All right. Their religion, I want to emphasize two factors about the religion, or two the gods. Well, all right, before getting into those two, I want to mention their gods are depicted as having human bodies with animal heads. Oftentimes their heads are falcon heads, but oftentimes their heads are cat heads. The Egyptians seem to have had a lot of love for the cat. They worshipped cats. And some of their gods had cat heads. I'm hesitant to mention it. Folk, there are persons who believe that these kind of creatures actually were put together by the Egyptians using genetic techniques. The Greeks had horses called centaurs, horses from the torso on down, and human from the torso on up. If you read Harry Potter, or look at Harry Potter, you see the centaurs. Pan had goat's feet, but from the torso on up, he was human. Pan was their god of fertility, the farm. All the ancient peoples depicted persons who were part human and animal, and for the last 50 years, we have experimented mixing human genes with animal genes. Whether we should be or not, we are. Most of you are probably not aware of it. Some of you might be aware of it. This does go on. All right. Isis. Yes, Isis is making a lot of news today. Isis was the mother of Osiris the sun. What's the significance? A lot of your religions have stories about a mother and a son. And some people would say it extends to Christianity, the mother being Mary and the son being Jesus. In these myths, the son dies, the mother tries to bring him back to life. Now, your book mentions this story and tells how that Osiris was hacked to pieces, 13 pieces. The mother wanted him to come back to life, so the mother went around and collected the pieces, and she collected 12 of the pieces. For the 13th part, she used brass to put the 13th part together, and worked. And then she went down into the netherworld, where her twin sister was guardian of the netherworld, and she worked out a deal with the netherworld to where eventually she could trade places with Osiris, but she never got to see Osiris. She was, when she was in the netherworld, he was in the top world. When then 6 months later, he'd go to the netherworld, and she'd go to the top world. In the meantime, Osiris was not the least bit interested in coming back to life, was not the least bit interested in seeing his mother anyway. This story is in your book in maybe a little bit different form. Isis, though, is an enigma because later on, the mystery religions started worshiping Isis again. Long after the Egyptian Empire fell, the Greeks took up the worship of Isis. Then even the Romans took up the worship of Isis until Christianity replaced her. And rumor has it, this is only rumor, that's difficult to prove, that Isis has been worshipped in secret all the way down through time, even in modern times. Secret societies, secret organizations still worship Isis. Now, ISIS is now the name given to a terror group. I cannot prove that the connection between the terrorist group and the goddess. I suspect there is one. The name Isis, if you read the Superman stories, there was an Isis character in the Superman stories also. Or if you look at the International Space Station, there are persons who have done some research and say that this Isis is seen in different forms all the way throughout history by your secret organizations. So in other words, that Isis is not just a dead goddess. Isis is also believed to be Inanna, whom you'll read about if you read the stories, and there will be a couple of test questions, the stories I put online. And the story of the war between Uruk and Aratta. Inanna was the mother of the king in Merakar, and Inanna was a goddess, just like Isis was a goddess. Again, take this for what you will. If you think I'm being a bit vague on it, it's because I'm hinting at something that I myself know that I cannot prove. But Isis is, again, it's been a part of the world throughout history. All right. Now, the Egyptians lived in isolation, partly because they had this, they had, to the north they had the sea, to the south they had a very, very dry desert, even though there was the Nile River. But the Nile River was separated. Before you start thinking of the great stones of the pyramid could have been floated on logs, I want to remind you again what I think I said Monday. There are no forests in Egypt. Also, a log raft cannot carry a 60-ton stone. And if that's not enough, the Nile River goes for a while and drops off. These drop-offs are called cataracts. Every river in Africa, I believe, except the Congo, flows like this. And when the initial explorers went to Africa, they would have to disassemble their boat, carry it upstream a ways past the cataract, then reassemble and travel on until they came to the next continent. Because the continent of Africa is set in layers. Another layer, another layer. So the rivers, and including the Nile, And again, if you can imagine getting a 60-ton stone over a cataract, well, it's basically impossible. But anyway, to the south, Egypt was isolated because of the difficulties in crossing the Nile, in navigating the Nile, south of Egypt, and also a very dry desert. To the east and west there was desert, to the north was the Mediterranean Sea. However, occasionally some of their pharaohs would branch out, and they conquered Canaan, and they got as far as Syria. And occasionally they would conquer to the south Nubia. Nubia was the land to the south of them. Now, the people living in Nubia were mostly black, if not all black. And from time to time, Nubia had white dynasties, but it was known that they had some black dynasties. And at one point, a black dynasty even overran Egypt. All right. Anyway, I'll talk more about Nubia next, after we're through with Egypt. Now, Egypt is mentioned quite a bit in the Bible, particularly, well, I could save this till I get to part of Israel. I'm going to mention it now. The Egyptians did not want to live in the land of Goshen, which was the land of the Nile Delta. So when the Jews decided to move in during a famine, the Pharaoh of Egypt gave them the land of Goshen. They said, okay, you can have the land of Goshen. The land of Goshen was a land of chaos, where every year the rivers changed course. The little streams that were part of the Nile River changed course, and they had to squabble a little bit over the land, something that was why the Egyptians did not care for it. But the people of Israel lived supposedly for 400 years in the land of Goshen. And during that time, they multiplied greatly, and the Egyptian Pharaoh became somewhat terrified of them. Now, we do find, when we excavate this region, we find bodies that are Semite bodies, for the Jews were a Semitic people. Maybe I better explain it. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth. Persons who have studied DNA believe that they can trace that every human alive today came from these 3, who came through, particularly every man, came from these 3 sons of Noah. But anyway, the Jews were from Shem, so they're called Semitic. Now, we sometimes hear the term anti-Semite. Adolf Hitler was an anti-Semite. What does that mean? It means that Adolf Hitler hated the Jews. This school was located in the middle of a Jewish community, and sometimes I think I can look around the class and tell who the Jews are and who they are. I'm not going to tell you what criteria I use to judge them. Again, I can only guess, but sometimes the names give them away, certain types of names. Anyway, now, we find Semitic people buried in the land of Goshen. That's the point I was trying to make for all this. We also find the plate names and Semitic writings in the land of Goshen. The Egyptians basically loathed the Semites. And that was even mentioned in the Bible. That was one reason why they wanted the Semitic people, the Jews, to live separate from them. And of course, this often happens. Eventually, a Semitic people took over Egypt and ruled as pharaohs for about 200 years. The Semitic people called the Hyksos. All right. I'm running out of time, but I'm going to try to finish the story. And when the Jews multiplied and the Egyptians became terrified of them, the Egyptians tried to limit their population by ordering all the babies killed. One of the babies was supposed to be killed was Moses. Moses was thrown into the Nile River in a basket. Pharaoh's daughter found him, and she brought him up in Pharaoh's palace. Now this story was to be repeated. I mean, Sargon also was thrown into a basket. And later on, Cyrus, the Great, king of Persia, was thrown into a basket. Three ancient peoples who were thrown into baskets, thrown into the river, expected to die, and were found. Romulus and Remus were thrown out into the wilderness, expected to die, but they were found. Romulus and Remus were the founders of Rome. Anyway, this is a common story from ancient times where sometimes these babies were discovered and were saved. In the case of Moses, he was drawn up from the water. That's what the name Moses means, drawn up from the water. And he was brought up in Pharaoh's palace. He and the next Pharaoh had a falling out, so he went off to live by himself for many years. Then when he was 80 years old, he and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Now, folk, I want to tell you, when I sat in high school, we had a teacher who believed, like almost everybody at that time, that you have to come up with a rational explanation for every phenomenon. Again, that's a fundamental assumption of modern scholarship. The fundamental assumption there is no God, there are no miracles, and every phenomenon has a natural explanation. The stories I'm about to tell, I mean, if you think that the Bible is far out, I want to remind you, what the ancients said is farther, much farther out than any story you're going to find in the Bible. But anyway, there's a man in the class, one of my fellow students in high school, name of Denvis Earls. Don't worry about that. He became a professor later. Actually, he became full-time, though, higher than I ever did. But he said, and I'll quote him, I'll never forget it, "I don't believe that story, and I'm a preacher's kid." Well, I myself also a preacher's kid. Maybe you can guess it. But I do believe it. Why? Again, the ancients had a different mindset. They had no doubt that there was a spirit world. They had no doubts in the existence of the gods, and they had no doubts in the faith of miracles. Their mindset was different from ours. With a lot of miracles, the Pharaoh, who looked on himself as being God, was finally persuaded to let the children of Israel go out of Egypt. Now, I want to tell you something about the difference between the way that the Israelis tell their history and the way that the Egyptians do. Every Passover, which occurs sometime in March or April, the Jews will assemble, and they will look around the room and say, "Now, who's the youngest Jew here?" Now, it has to be someone who's old enough to talk. I mean, if there's one there who's too young to talk, he can't participate. But you look around and get who's the youngest Jew there, and then they ask around, "Now, who's the oldest Jew here?" And it has to be someone it can even be someone who's but it has to be someone who still has their mind. I mean, some people lose their mind when they get older. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. So this young Jew, usually a preschool child, would go up to the old Jew and ask the question, "Why is tonight different from other nights?" And the old Jew would tell the story to the young one. This ceremony has been going on for 3,000 years. Even the agnostics among the Jews believe it. They'll try to figure out a rational explanation for it. One rational explanation, a Jewish man named Velikovsky figured that the planet Mars used to get close to the Earth than it does now. And when it got close to the Earth, it created a lot of tides. And during one of the one of the low tides, the Israelis went across the Red Sea dry. And then when Pharaoh's army went across the Red Sea, the Red Sea closed in on, the high tide came up and drowned Pharaoh's army. That would call for a whole bunch of coincidences. I do not believe that. But nevertheless. Now, the Hyksos were a bunch of nomadic Semitic people, shepherds. They called them shepherd kings, and the Egyptians hated shepherds. I'll be right with you. How could a bunch of shepherds with a bunch of riffraff take over Egypt? The answer is, folk, Egypt had no army. Their army was destroyed. All right, you had a question.
I was just wondering what story you were referring to.
The story found in Exodus 1 through 12 in that Bible. Yeah, Exodus 1 through 12, chapter 1 through 12. All right, the story of Exodus also has some very interesting, it almost seems like that Moses could go from Pharaoh to the land of Goshen in a matter of a few minutes. And that Pharaoh could get on his telephone and summon Moses to see him when Moses went out of Goshen. And Moses could be in Pharaoh's presence in a matter of minutes. Then, with a short time afterward, Moses could be right back with his own people in the land of Goshen. A journey would take days, even with a horse, or even with the Nile River. It almost seemed like they had instant travel and instant communication. Also, the story features where that Moses' brother threw down his rod and became a poisonous snake. So Pharaoh summoned the Egyptian magicians, and they threw down their rods, and they became snakes. Again, I want to remind you folks of something. You think this is far out. All of your ancient peoples began their histories or stories just like this. Whether they're mine, I mean, I had one pupil a few back put it this way: is it us or them who has lost our way? He said it must be us, not them.